start the live stream, that would be appreciated. So this is the Planning Committee meeting of the 15th of July. Thank you very much for coming. This is being live streamed, so if I could ask everyone to make sure they speak into their microphone, would make it a lot easier for those watching to hear. So without further ado, I will move onto the agenda and onto item 1. And item 1 is to ask you to give me authorization to sign the minutes of the meeting of the 20th of May. Correct? Thank you very much. That's good. Thank you. Apologies.
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillors Johnson and Meir, substituted by Councillors John, Barnes and Thomas, respectively.
Thank you very much. And we have additional items for the agenda. Additional items?
No additional items.
For those who have paper notes, there was the housing delivery test, which I assume you all have. That will be run through later. Do we have any withdrawn applications? No withdrawn applications. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Yes.
I seem to remember seeing an email from Councillor Stevens saying that she was ill and couldn't attend today's meeting, so it was a form of apology. I think. Might be wrong. Can I give her apologies now?
I think we can probably accept that as her apologies, yes. Thank you, Councillor Ganley. And we do hope that she is improving. Do we have any disclosures of interest? No disclosures of interest? Well, if any occur to you as we go through the agenda, please just raise them at the time. You can see the application index. And moving on to the first item, which is item 7, and that's RR 2021/109/P, Valencia Station Road, Northiam, where we did a site visit. And I'll ask the officer to take us through that. We have Claire here today, and we do have a speaker for the applicant who we'll hear after the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. This agenda item is about involves an application seeking permission for a residential scheme in Station Road, Northiam. It involves the retention of an existing house, the main house known as Valencia, and redevelopment of the back garden to provide 2 pairs of semi-detached houses and 1 detached house. So overall, 5 houses are proposed. Obviously, you all did a site visit on Tuesday, but I thought it's just worth refreshing ourselves of the site and surroundings. The applicants kindly pegged out the scheme, which helped the site visit. So we'll start off with the site, which is on front onto Station Road, which is the A28, a strategic road, subject to a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. The site itself comprises of a detached chalet bungalow and a substantial rear garden with a number of trees and ancillary outbuildings. And moving to this along the southwest boundary of the site, we've got a property called Fairley, which is a detached bungalow, which is typical of the developments that front Station Road in this part of Northiam. A property set in a plot with a substantial back and rear garden. And as we move along, we've got Donsmead Drive, which is a comparatively recent development of 2-storey houses, which is part of a comprehensive redevelopment. And as you can see, you've got the houses there set in plots, set back with rear gardens. And as we move round to the rear of the site, we've got the development boundary that actually bisects the site, as shown there on the cursor, and at the rear of the site is a sort of what I would call an amenity area, a recreational area. When I've visited the site, it's used by people walking their dogs. There are no the rights of way are sort of off this map, but there are a number of permissible paths that run along the rear. Then moving around, we've got the first property is Oakwood, which is actually now called the Haven. It's a detached property set in a substantial garden, which is accessed by a private road. And the next property along is Eva Cottage, which is again a comparatively recently developed property. Completed in 2016, a two-storey detached house. Set, as you can see, within a plot with a rear garden. Next property over, which abuts the site, the main dwelling, is a timber lodge. As you saw during the site visit, that is actually a cleared site at the moment. It's been subject to another number of planning applications, the most recent of which is currently being considered by us for a detached house and a detached garage. Again, just a sort of a refresher, that is the main property, Valencia, with a couple of car parking spaces in front of it, and obviously the existing side road with vehicles parked along it, and that access road will be extended back into the site along with a turning head towards the rear. But as you can see as well, you can see the substantial oak tree that we saw when we visited. Again, another picture of the access road. This is the site. This is taken from the side, looking towards Valencia, looking over the cleared site, Timber Lodge. And then this is taken from the other side, showing Fairley and looking towards the rear garden of the application site. So this is a block plan showing the proposed development. So what I'll do is I'll sort of start at the front, if you like, and then we'll walk towards the rear. So as there was going to be another separate access to the house, but following concerns by East Sussex County Council, the existing access will be retained and used for the main house, Valencia, and also the 5 dwellings. So there'll be 4 car parking spaces in the front of the garden, serving Valencia. And then we walk along the access road, there'll be visitor car parking. And then we come to the first pair of semi-detached houses. You see there's two houses, a pair with car parking to either side. So 3 car parking spaces for each property. Obviously those car parking spaces are tandem, which isn't an ideal arrangement. And then we've got the rear gardens of the properties, which I'll start at 5 metres for this, which is obviously below the standard required by the policy, which states a minimum length of 10 metres. There is an area to the side, but it's the length going backwards which counts. And then as we're going along, there's the next pair of semi-detached. Again, one of them has got 3 car parking spaces, and the other one has got 4 car parking spaces. And at this point, at the widest, the rear gardens are 8 metres in length. At this point, the access road is extended, and then there's a turning space there that allows vehicles to move along. And then crucial, given that it's a strategic road, that vehicles enter and leave the site in first gear, forward gear, and that enables vehicles to do so. Then at the rear, we've got a detached house, which supporting information with the application indicates the applicants propose to live in, with a detached garage to the side. The development boundary runs along the rear building line there. Obviously, there has been recent development around the application site, as we saw from our site visit, but you can see from this block plan that really it's not this development that's being before you today is not characteristic of the other developments. The rear gardens, the relationship with the neighbouring properties, particularly back gardens, expect to enjoy some level of peace and quiet. The windows, the 2-storey dwellings overlook into those rear gardens and indirectly into the habitable rooms. It's a very close relationship, and there have been letters of concern raising that aspect of loss of privacy. The next slide shows the trees. There are 32 trees existing on site at the moment. They range in sort of their age and their type. I'm afraid you might not be able to see this very clearly, but what it does show is that the blue trees are the ones that are going to be retained. The orange are going to be removed. The red dotted lines show the root protection zones, and then the blue represents the fencing that is proposed to protect the trees during construction. The main areas where tree removal is proposed is along the extended access road, so that you'll see there's a number along that access road that will go. There are a couple of the back gardens of the proposed houses. Just plot 1 has a couple that will go at the front and the back, and then plots 3 and 4 as well have some, and then the front garden adjacent to the turning head of the detached properties as well. These are the drawings showing the semi-detached properties, so 2-storey dwellings, 3 bedrooms, so with kitchen, diner, living room on the ground floor, 3 bedrooms on the first. Then we've got the detached property at the back, which is a substantial property with side addition and rear addition and detached garage. And those are the side elevations and a substantial level of accommodation. So overall, it's recognised, obviously, that this development will provide family housing, but in this instance, it's considered that the harm, as outlined in the report, is outweighed by the benefits. Another consideration is that a site of this site should provide affordable housing. The supporting information submitted with the application indicates that these will be self-build units, but typically, as outlined in paragraph 871 of the report, self-building are service plots where the end users can decide the design of their houses. But in this case, obviously, that design has been put forward. So overall, this application is recommended for refusal for the 4 reasons that are stated in the report.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. We have just one speaker today for the applicant, and that's Richard Sonic. So, Richard, if you'd like to come up and, oh, sorry, once again. When you get then, and you'll be number 2 speaker after Councillor Mooney, if that's all right. Yeah, fine. Is that all right? We'll have Councillor Mooney speak, and then I'll start with yourself, if that's okay. And we'll do that when we get to the discussion. That's okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Sonic. So you have 5 minutes to present your points, and the key is that you don't introduce new things. That you just stick to supporting your what's in your application, and there will be questions from members after that. I'm sorry, we can't see each other very well from that. So if you'd like to. You've got 5 minutes is quite a bit of time, really, so give it a go. And if you press the button in front of you, the little red light should come on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, good morning. The location plan on the front page of the Planning Officer's report failed to show both the Donsmead estate comprising 66 houses to the south and Ilex Close with 5 houses to the north, directly abutting and enclosing the application site. The report incorrectly states objection in bold against the Local Highways Authority heading. This should read no objection, as the Local Highways Authority are completely satisfied with the proposed access, visibility, parking and provision for turning on the site. The application site is within the development boundary for Northiam, where there is a presumption in favour of residential development. The planning officer is incorrect in her opinion that the proposal would represent an uncharacteristic redevelopment within the area, because there are bungalows, semi-detached and detached houses either side in Ilex Close and Donsmead development. The semi-detached houses will have Sussex-style clay-tiled roofs, clay tile hanging and local stock brickwork to elevations. The applicant has commissioned a revised design to satisfy the planning officer's concern. Please see drawing number 1407/2, showing the elevations with reduced eaves height, reduced roof height and barn hips, and cottage-style dormer windows resulting in reduced bulking. The Potton home has rooms in the roof to both reflect the chalet style of Valencia and also to lower the roof height and bulking. And on viewing the block plan, Donsmead Drive continues beyond the Potton house towards the AONB by 3 more 2-storey houses. The applicants have lived at Valencia for 17 years and will be living in the Potton home, and their children Dan, Stacey and their granddaughter will be living in plot 4 of the semi-detached houses, and have commissioned a detailed report by Quaife Trees, arboriculturists, which explains that rotten and less significant trees such as old apple, cherry and sycamore will be removed, and a programme for the retention and protection of the significant oaks and maple will be implemented. They have seen Ilex Close and Donsmead Drive go up around them. At over an acre, the garden is uncharacteristically large for both modern living and the local area, and this proposed low-density development, incorrectly described as cramped by the planning officer, will act as a natural transition between the high-density housing of Donsmead and the low density of Ilex Close. Amenity of neighbours is protected by fencing, significant hedge and tree boundary screening, and the natural buffer strip between the ends of Donsmead Close Drive, Donsmead Drive Gardens and the subject site. 2 parking spaces per house are required, plus 2 visitor spaces totaling 12. With 21 parking spaces proposed, removal of excess parking bays will increase garden amenity space for each of the semi-detached houses. The committee could suggest this be conditioned. The Development and Site Allocations Plan states that within the high-wheeled AONB, development should be small scale and in keeping with the landscape and settlement pattern. And it is small scale and in keeping with the landscape and, importantly, the settlement pattern. Policy DHG7 is satisfied because the garden amenity space and parking for the semi-detached houses has been designed specifically in line with the similar proportions of Donsmead Drive, and in some instances may be larger when viewing numbers 10, 12, 17 and 20. The development will provide £73,000 under the Community Infrastructure Levy and a further £33,420 under the newly created New Homes Bonus Scheme, totalling £106,420. DHG1 states that in the high-wheeled AONB, 40% affordable housing contribution should be sought for developments of 6 or more dwellings, or 0.2 hectares or more, 5 new dwellings, and where the site is greater than 0.2 hectares, the committee must see that on a development of only 5 houses, this would be financially unviable, and against the wording later in policy DHG1, which states, and I quote, "The local authority should not pursue affordable housing contributions if they would make the provision of an otherwise suitable development unviable, in this case resulting in 5 dwellings not being built." In conclusion, the planning officer's opinion that the design is out of character and will affect the layout and visual amenity of the area cannot be upheld when the site is designed to blend in with the rural character of the area and is already surrounded by significant high and low density development and is clearly located within the Northiam development boundary. The distance of the new properties from neighbouring properties and the orientation of neighbouring properties means that their amenities will not be altered. The planning officer's concern regarding the 2-storey appearance of the semi-detached houses has been fully addressed in the drawing number 1407/2, showing reduced roof ridge height, lowered eaves and cottage-style dormer windows. The rural character of the dwellings, low-density development, amenity space and tree retention, and more than ample provision for parking and access all complies with the highways, refuse waste and emergency services and local and national planning policy framework guidance. And I respectfully request on behalf of the applicants that the Planning Committee approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Keeping within your time as well. So do we have any questions for Mr. So do you want to stay sat down just in case there are questions? Do you have any questions, Mr. Sonic? We have one from Councillor Barnes. I'll go for Mary Barnes first to keep the family happy.
Good morning.
Oh, sorry. Good morning.
I was obviously everything that you said is what you was what is here, but it was just a sentence you used towards the end that I really would like to take issue with, and that is the amenities of the local other neighbours particularly will not be harmed. The fact that the first set of semi-detached have extremely small gardens is clearly not within our normal brief. So when you were actually designing that,
Yes.
were you aware of that?
Yes. Yeah. But sorry. Oh.
No,
Yeah.
no,
No,
sorry.
it was it's the orientation of the gardens against the back of the houses. So that when you, for example, if you view Donsmead Close, you will see that the houses are very linear, and so the gardens are the width of the houses. They haven't got large double parking bays next to them. So these houses have got double parking bays next to them and space between the parking bays and the side of the houses. So they are linear length gardens across the width of the site of the house, as opposed to whereas if you look in Donsmead Close, you'll see that the houses are narrow and the gardens go lengthways. So these houses have gardens running across the rear of their property and around the side, whereas the Donsmead house development don't have any side garden area at all.
Thank you for that. But can I just sort of say that obviously in the report that we heard before, that actually it is the length of the garden that matters, and it is half the amount that would have been normally.
I do understand that, but obviously with the constraints of the site to create the amount of amenity space, that is how it was. That's how it's been designed with the linear garden space. So it still gives the same amount of space. It's just differently oriented.
Well, I have to say I was concerned about it when I saw it, and in fact it's both sets, isn't it, that are going to be below the minimum. So sorry,
that's how it was.
My question.
That's how it's been
whether
designed.
you knew, and obviously you.
Thank you, Mary. Councillor John Barnes.
Yeah. Yes. Mm. Well, my view is that the Northiam development boundary is the Northiam development boundary, and it has been development will be permitted, I suppose. If the Northiam development boundary went down the south side of the site to the back of Valencia and across and back up, then there would be clearly no point in making the application. But the Northiam development boundary, as councillors will realise, has been more recently amended to extend across the back of the site. The house has been located inside the development boundary and not outside the development boundary. And if a development boundary is not a development boundary, then what is it?
Okay. So, I understand the reasoning. And
also the garden behind the Potton house is already a garden.
Yeah.
So it's not, and the house has been designed down so it doesn't affect the AONB with the reduced eaves.
yes, my other question, in some ways I'm quite glad to see the amount of parking, because in rural areas, most people in towns don't always understand. The car is actually pretty essential. But you have been quite lavish in your parking at the expense of garden space.
That's right.
I wondered if that is modifiable by the owners?
It's absolutely, as I said in my presentation, the committee could, where are we? 2 parking spaces per house are required, plus 2 visitor spaces, totaling 12. With 21 spaces proposed, removal of excess parking bays will increase garden amenity space for each of the semi-detached houses. The committee could suggest this be conditioned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Project.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. 2 questions, please. One is on the self-build, the issues raised in the report about the self-build. It doesn't attract SIL, does it, if you do self-build? But well, how will you get over the problem of labelling it as self-build when it doesn't actually comply with the rules of self-build?
Well, I believe it does comply with the rules of self-build. The owners of the property have both of them individually worked. The owners of Valencia have worked with Peter and Dawn have worked with Pot and Homes specifically to design that house. Peter is in fact a development director or manager of sites, and he is going to be on the digger, and he's going to be working running the building sites himself. He goes up to London every day at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning and runs big sites, basements and big developments, and that is what he is going to do. He is going to be working with Dan and Stacey, his children, who have also been working on the design of the plot 4, which they will be living in. So, and they will be working on that themselves as well. So those 2 sites will be self-built, and that's the SIL application form is not very easily navigable. And if a mistake has been made to say that all the buildings are going to be self-built, that's completely incorrect. It's only going to be those 2, as I stated in here, and that's basically basically.
I mean, the reason I'm asking, we've had obviously applications before where they've said being self-built,
yeah,
and they didn't turn out to be self-built.
No,
so
they will be self-built, and
okay.
The raison d'etre behind the actual whole project is that Pete and Dawn have 3 children. One's a nurse, another one is an ambulance driver, and another one's in the police force.
Don't think I need to know that.
No, you don't. But they all want to stay in the air. They want to stay in the village, but they can't. And
Could
so
I go on to my second question, please?
Okay.
The second question was about, I presume, as they've been there 17 years, as you say, that the pond has been filled in while they're there. Because the last house is going to be built over the pond, and I'm just querying your idea of viability, because it would seem that some affordable financial contribution, if it's not actually built as affordable on the site, we have issues over viability, and we know now that the questions are raised about viability because of the cost of the land, and presumably the land cost here is negligible and probably free. So I would like to just
buy the property in the first place. They've got a mortgage on the property. They had to buy it. It's not free land. It's their home. We all have mortgages, so they own that site, and it's cost them money. So it's not free by any means.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for Mr. Sonax? Any other questions? One last one, John. Yes, thank you. Councillor.
Yes, I think it's quite important, actually, what you've just said, because effectively these are owners of the site who are intending to stay on the site and develop it in part as a family.
Absolutely.
3-generation.
Absolutely.
Setup. I just wanted to clarify that point. how many of the houses will be occupied by the family? Because you
Two.
spoke of 3 children.
Yeah, two.
So it's only one of the family that will be remaining.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And Councillor Madeley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning to you.
Morning.
One question on TPOs. Are you aware of any of the trees, whether planned felling or being retained, have TPOs?
No, they don't have TPOs. Quaif Trees, arboriculturists, have been on site. They spent a day there inspecting all the trees. Their what's the word? Assessment is that the majority of the trees, if you look closely at the report, you will see that the majority of the trees that are going to be removed are either diseased. For example, there's a beautiful cherry tree there, a large, very old cherry tree, but that's got a special, I can't remember the name of it now, gondolizer or something. It's got a special root fungus, which means it's dying. So that's going to be removed. Several old apple trees from the back garden, as it sycamore trees, which again are not deemed to be a protected tree. They are protecting maple, special field maple, and oaks, and also providing special design for root protection of those trees that are being retained.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sonic. If you'd like to go back and take your seat, and then I think we're having Councillor Mooney speak. If you could swap places. Thank you. Your microphone is already on, Councillor Mooney. So.
Thank you indeed. The layout of the houses in the development is similar, but to those in Donsmead, with gardens, stroke amenities, areas of similar size, but having the added advantage of more private parking. Why would the turning head be any more incongruous than those already in the village, such as the paddock, Monk's Way, and High Meadow in the Beezer estate? 18 representations of support have been received. Northiam Parish Council voted 3 in favour, 3 against. The neighbouring development, Donsmead, close I should call it, I suppose, is similar in scale and doesn't reflect the character of the area. Why pick on Valencia? Finally, additional information received from the applicant's agent shows lowering the ridge height of the roofs of the semi-detached dwellings, reducing bulk, providing a more rustic character to the design with tile dormer windows and bonnet hibs. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Mooney. I should just point out that we all did receive those amendments, and the problem is that they are amendments, so we can't actually put them as part of the application. We have to judge on what we're given here. So that is a bit of a challenge, but I do appreciate that you sent those through. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to move on to the committee, and Councillor Ganley is also joint board member. Would you like to speak first or ask questions? Up to you, really.
Thank you, Chairman. When I first read this report, I thought, well, it's an open and shut case for refusal. There's no question. And then I started delving into it a bit more deeply, and I found a number of what seemed to be anomalies, which raised a number of questions, and I picked out 4 of them. The first one is regarding paragraph 6.2. I think it's on page 8, yeah. In order to avoid anybody being misled by the bold type shall I continue with my other questions? Or
Would you like the officer just to confirm? Yeah, please.
We haven't actually, they've been reconsulted, but we haven't got a formal withdrawal, so they haven't withdrawn their objection.
So you're saying that the highways object to this application?
As initially submitted, they've seen the revised plans, but they haven't come back with a response.
This is rather misleading the committee, because the properties will be using the same exit and entrance as the existing property. There's no additional danger there. Parking is in excess of what is required. Turning circle is provided. I really cannot see how we can support, or we can go along with an objection on that basis. I notice, in fact, though, you haven't used that as one of the reasons for recommending refusal.
That's as maybe, but they've got to actually formally withdraw their objection, and as I say, they haven't done that to date.
I'm sorry?
They haven't formally withdrawn their objection.
No, I understand that, but I note that you do not consider that a reason for refusal.
No.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much.
Second question, if you like. I found it rather puzzling that the officer objected to two-storey buildings being erected on this site, when in fact it's surrounded by two-storey buildings. And indeed now it is proposed to lower the eaves and ridge heights to reduce their height and bulk in line with the officer's requirements. And it will also provide a more rustic character to the design with tiled dormer windows and bonnet hips, again to comply with officers' requirement to reflect the rural character of the area and the UNB. I imagine this would also reduce the risk of overlooking neighbouring properties. So may I presume that you will now withdraw your objections on those grounds, just on those grounds?
I'm afraid they still stand. They're two-storey houses, and if you're standing on the floor convention, you can look out to the back or front.
If I could just re-emphasise too, those amendments that were proposed that came through on email, they are actually amendments. They're comments, and if they wanted to be included, they would have to resubmit another plan, as annoying as that might be. We have to look at the plan as it is presented to us today. I mean, if they resubmitted with that might have a material impact. I don't know.
Right. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
For that clarification. Point 3. I'm also puzzled by paragraph 8.2.2. Can't remember what it was. I was puzzled about it. So I'll have to bring it up. 8.2.2. Oh, yes. It says most of the built form would be within the development boundary, but the rear building line of the detached house would be built to abut the boundary. Proposed development would then extend beyond the development boundary. It would be used, the little bit of the garden that is not within the development boundary would be used as a garden. In other words, there'd be no change of use. So why would one object to something that does not require a change of use? I don't really understand that at all.
That parcel of land is included within the red line of the planning application, so it's an inherent part of the proposal.
Yeah. And
it being used as a garden is a change of, it's not a change of use because it's already garden space.
Yeah.
But it would be the garden of that extending into that area, because that rear part of that garden, you'll appreciate, it's got quite a verdant character. You are then inadvertently or intentionally extending the development boundary so it's outside of.
But that possibility existed previously. The garden paraphernalia. Thank you. What she says.
Yeah, it's true. It's part of the garden now, yes, which we can't dispute. But
could have been extended to that area. They could have put garden chairs and desks.
Yeah, although subject to things like permitted development the rights and things would be restricted because it's so far away from the house, they wouldn't be able to really benefit from having any substantial structures down there, which a new property may well do because those buildings would be closer to that new property. So it brings risk with it.
I really can't see that when there's no change of use that one can help. Anyway, there we go. Fine, I think it's fine. Yes, my last point is with regard to the 0.2 hectares rule, which I must confess I was not aware of. So thank you for educating me. But I would be grateful if you could read out the rule regarding 0.2 hectares, and specifically and particularly the paragraph towards the end, which speaks of non-viability.
Sorry, Councillor Gandy, do you mean the policy word or the report?
What do I mean? Yeah.
Follow up the core strategy.
I apologise, not as prepared today as we would have been on any other occasion.
Getting back into being in a room.
Very kind.
Strangely. That's one. Sounds good. I've got Councillor Barnes next. Does anyone want to speak after Councillor Barnes?
Sorry, Councillor Gandy, can you just remind us which bit it is that you'd like us to read?
Section on the
So policy DHG1 relates to affordable housing, and it states that on housing sites or mixed-use developments, the council will expect the following percentages of affordable housing within the district. So specifically for this site, it's a rural area, so Part 4 applies. In the rural areas, specifically in A or in B, we would expect to see 40% on-site affordable housing schemes of 6 dwellings or more, or on sites of 0.2 hectares or more. Where it can be demonstrated that these requirements would either render otherwise suitable development unviable, or where the local need for affordable housing would no longer justify the above levels, the council will respectively expect the proportion of affordable housing to be the most that does not undermine viability or is needed locally. An exception to this may be made when the main purpose of the housing is to support business development where job creation is a priority. Well, only in the way that members will be familiar with, that if somebody's trying to not provide affordable housing, that would be demonstrated via viability information. But none is presented as far as I'm aware. Self-built houses are not classified as affordable housing.
Do you want to also clarify, because this is a fairly tricky point about self-build, that I think it's the government guidelines, if I'm not correct, that there's if you put in a self-build, you can't actually put the design in because it has to be sort of its purpose of saying something self-build. Do you want to just clarify that for the committee? I think that was a point you made.
Yeah, I think Claire's written in the report, and Claire, sorry to talk over you, that she's actually quoted how a self-build unit is defined in the PPG. Yep. But self-build is a term that's used in different ways as well. So what's in the report is just explaining to you that these don't appear to be self-build in the way that the PPG explains that they are. SIL has also been mentioned, SIL exemption and how you classify self-build. Again, slightly different, so that complicates the matter. But I suppose really this just gives us the opportunity to kind of clarify that point from the determination point of view, which is there's no requirement for self-build on this block in terms of planning policy, and what should be achieved over and above that is affordable housing. So the issue is they may well be proposed as self-build units, subject to whether they meet the definition of not, but that's not what's required on this site, the affordable housing element.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ganley. Councillor Barnes, and then Norton.
Yes, I begin with a question, and then I would like to go on and comment. But has the question of viability been explored by either party?
No.
If I can begin really the discussion, Chairman. Like Councillor Ganley, cold before I visited the site, I was quite strongly minded to refuse. I think I was misled, and I don't blame the officer for this. In fact, I congratulate the officer on what seems to me a very comprehensive report, which properly identifies for us all the issues. But I think the map that was put on the front did in fact give an impression that what we were dealing with was backland and that it would set a precedent. When I actually got there, I was really quite startled. And I have to say, the existence of Donsmead seems to me to have already transformed the character of that part of Northiam. It's very curious. I noticed we've drawn the building line very carefully to go back behind Donsmead a little further towards Valencia. And then we've kept it quite tight to Oakwood. But in a sense, Donsmead is already projecting quite a long way into the AONB. And the entire development seems to me to be, I mean, I don't know how it got planning permission. I was not party to that decision, but it does seem to me we have already transformed this area very considerably. Ilex Close 2 has created much denser development, different character, admittedly, on the other side of the property. And hence, we ourselves, through our planning decisions, or the inspector, I haven't got the planning history of those other two sites in front of me, have transformed the life of the people in Valencia. We have had a major impact on them. And it seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable in those circumstances that they should be applying for development. It is within the development boundary. I have some unease about how strong the presumption of development is. But frankly, I can't find it in myself to think that development on this site is unacceptable per se. So I then found myself addressing the question, and I really am in two minds about this. I found myself addressing the question of what sort of development would be appropriate. It seems to me the house at the back is very much in keeping with Oakwood and the other houses immediately to the northeast of it. In other words, I don't think that's going to have a different impact on the OMB from the houses that are already there. So we then come really to the semi-detached, and that's where I think the argument really has to turn. Because it seems to me we are a little between the devil and the deep blue sea. On the one side, we have got Donsmead, quite intensively developed with two-story houses. On the other side, we have Eva Lodge and Bay Trees, rather more substantial properties in rather small gardens, really for the size of house, but nevertheless a different character. And the question really is, I think, about the appropriateness of the transition. Personally, I couldn't find it in myself to raise any problems about the second of the two plots. I do take the point that the garden is not as long as we would wish, but on the other hand, there is a substantial side area. Indeed, I somewhat puzzled about the amount of parking. And frankly, if I were developing that house myself as one of the members of the family, is that's a point I will be looking at. What gives me some pause, I have to say, and still leaves me in two minds at this moment, I shall listen to the debate with some interest, is the first parent. So 831. I think it's a proper description of Northiam as it was. I'm not sure actually it's an accurate description of Northiam as it is developed in the last decade. And I think this is a classic example of the dilemma when you're dealing with a large village that is moving away from linear development along the road to a lot more back down development in other areas of the village, but particularly here with Donsmead. And I think that's the dilemma for us this morning. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Norton.
Well, at the risk of coming across as a horticultural pedant, can I draw attention to a very fine specimen tree in the garden, which hasn't been mentioned? I know we're going to save the mature oaks, and I know that there were some very scruffy fruit trees that deserve to be uprooted, but there was a very fine specimen of a Persian ironwood tree, one of the biggest I've ever seen, which apparently is doomed because it's going to interfere with the roadway. And I think we need to be aware, we all know the tremendous imperative need to defend beeches and oaks and ashes, our native trees, but when we have fine specimens of ornamental trees, then I think we need to consider them as well. I just would draw your attention to that because it wasn't mentioned. I'm a little bit puzzled by this argument that Councillor Mooney made and Councillor Barnes has made, that because Donswood Drive is not perhaps a terribly attractive development, it is rather disfiguring to the edge of a lovely village, that we should compound the sin by building next door to it, by filling in what at the moment is a lovely open space, a beautiful garden. I would very much regret the loss of that. I feel that the neighbours are going to be, their quality of life is going to be damaged by this. I do think it's going to infringe their privacy. We saw it yesterday under very favourable conditions. We saw it with all the deciduous trees fully if I was being Donsmead Drive, I would be quite upset about that. The loss of the garden is sad. You know, garden grabbing is a pernicious development all over the place, which we ought to be fiercely opposed to. It's happening in my home village of Winchelsea, and it is a menace, and it is happening here. And of course, we're sympathetic to the family and their children who are all in socially useful occupations, as we've been told. We are sympathetic towards them, that they're in a difficult position. But I'm not sure that's a reason why we should give permission to this. It's on the edge of the village, which I think makes the site of more strategic value. It's adjacent to fairly unspoilt countryside. And I think it's just adding to the urbanization of what is one of the most attractive villages in this area. I very much regret that, and I can see John's arguments, and that we have allowed previous developments to take place, which perhaps we should not have done. But I don't think that's an argument for compounding our felony in a sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments, Councillor Project?
Thank you. Councillor, can you put your microphone? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that we are always faced with applications which are from a personal point of view of the applicant for solving a problem or creating a better life for them. So the personal circumstances are difficult not to disregard in a way. They are difficult to disregard, but we have to think in long term, don't we? And the thing that puzzled me, and it's a comment, and is that clearly the family are going to stay in the property, but their front garden is going to go, because where are they going to put their 3 cars? And they're going to have 25 car movements a day past that side window. But nobody's made that comment in the report, because obviously they would put up with it because they are family members and they want this development. I think Councillor John Barnes has actually made the case that there could be some development in that very, very long garden. There could be. But I don't think he's made the case that this is the right one. And for me, the gardens, it's broken a lot of our rules. And we're trying to make life better for people who are living in these new houses. And with a small garden, with very little amenity space, the amenity space of Valencia is going. Tandem parking, which we don't like, is going to be introduced. There's the financial viability or unviability, where we don't get any affordable, according to our rules, that there are questions over the self-build. Never mind the fact that a pond has been filled in, will lose biodiversity. And I think I asked on the site, what about the biodiversity report? Well, it's only garden. Well, actually, gardens are a huge, huge source of biodiversity. So for me, I think I can't approve this one. I won't be supporting it. And if you want me to move something, I will move refusal along the lines the officers have recommended.
Thank you, Councillor Prochet. Any other takers? Yes, Councillor Langlands.
Yes, just a couple of questions. Looking at the plan, I tend to agree with Councillor Barnes that they've probably overdone the parking just a little bit, and it would improve the amenity space if there wasn't so much of that. And I have seen cycle or bin stores or anywhere in the plan, so obviously that's got to come into the mix as well in terms of space. So it would be nice to see less parking and perhaps a little bit, just a small space for that. I was a bit concerned about the self-build, in the sense that with the one access, I would like to think that there will be conditions, I'm sure there will be, in terms of what's coming and going and when, unless they're self-building the entire site. So, I mean, that would concern me. And the other thing was, page 6, the pond. There was an enforcement notice I read from one of the neighbours. Was anything ever done about that? Has that been withdrawn to reinstate the pond? I mean, because that rather messes up everything. All right. Yeah. I just haven't seen anything that sort of settles my mind that that's been dealt with.
Yeah, there was a pond right at the end of the site, which some of you might have seen during the site visit, had branches on it. And the planning enforcement team did investigate at the time, and that pond was reinstated. And so, but obviously since then, it has been filled in. It should be a pond.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Langlands. Could you turn your microphone off? Thank you. Any more comments? Yes, Councillor Errington.
Oh, sorry, these should have been earlier. In terms of the visitor parking, how many spaces is that? 2?
Yes, I think there are.
Thank
yeah,
you.
along the side.
And can you just confirm
I'll
that
just double check. Yes, it's two. It'll be two or three spaces at that area there.
Yeah. And can you also confirm, I think there was a fence going all the way along so that if the future owners of Valencia, because I understand that the owners of Valencia will move to Potman House, so there will be a fence whereby they could access, park in the front garden and walk safely round to the back garden. Is there a fence?
That's that level of detail hasn't been.
Okay. And finally, just to confirm that these are to scale in that the tandem parking, I know why I don't like tandem parking, but perhaps somebody could explain why it's not a good idea. But that would then be over the edge of the end of that plot. So if you were sitting in the garden, potentially, car is there as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments that you would like to make? Councillor Mooney, would you like to have a sort of a final minute or so, or not? You may want to come to the microphone so we can. Yes, could you come to the microphone? Sorry. Oh, did you? Oh, if you just sit there for a minute, Councillor Mooney. I think I missed Councillor Thomas. My apologies. Please.
I think the key sentence here is in 8.3.2, where you've written, I have to change glasses. Despite the grading of some of the trees, the position of 5 houses, along with car parking, an access road and associated turning head, would have an urbanizing effect to the detriment of the spacious, verdant character and appearance of the area. I think that's the key point, because what we have here in effect is a mini housing development. And although we do have a very large housing development to the right, what we're considering actually isn't a housing development, it's a rear garden, and completely different considerations apply. And if we're in a situation where we're going to be losing, as it says, 2/3 of the trees, I'm not quite sure that the grading of the trees is the only point to bear in mind. Because in our last planning training, it became clear that planning inspectors are increasingly being affected by environmental considerations. And if we've got a climate emergency, the loss of 2/3 of the trees is a very substantial point from an environmental point of view. And I think that's to be borne in mind. And we're talking about as many as 21 car parking spaces. And that is a considerable urbanization. And I think the precedent we're setting is not a precedent for the area as a whole, but a precedent for back garden development. And we should set a precedent for back garden development where it's not going to be overcrowded and it's not going to be over-urbanized. So despite the very strong arguments on the other side, I'm going to come down in favour of Councillor Pochak's motion. Thank you.
Yeah, if we're speaking to the motion, I think what Councillor Thomas has said is both right and wrong. I think we've already altered the character of this. If Alex Drive hadn't been there, we would be dealing with Village Edge. And although I would be regretting what had happened at Donsby, I wouldn't be quite so worried. It seems to me we've squeezed this property between two. I should probably in the end abstain rather than vote against, because I do think there is an element of overdevelopment here. But I think the notion that we are garden grabbing, I'm sorry, Richard, I have to say, I disagree with that. I think effectively the garden grabbing all round has already taken place, and that we are actually trying to leave a small oasis, which is actually very unfair to the people living there. I genuinely am worried about the first pair of houses, not because I think they're intrusive. When I stood there yesterday, I didn't see how they were intrusive at all. on the neighbouring properties. What I thought is the reverse is the case. The neighbouring properties would be far too intrusive on that pair of houses. And it seemed to me that is the nub of my problem about overdevelopment. I think actually, if we could get a smaller development there with fewer traffic movements, which still allowed Cotton House at the back, that would probably be the most acceptable solution for me. That's not on offer. I can't really vote with Councillor Prochak's motion. I will probably abstain.
Thank you. I do really feel for the occupants of Valencia. They've seen all this development go on around them, and I guess they thought, well, we can't do anything about it. We can't beat them, join them, and their planned house at the very bottom would have been a beautiful option for them to have. On saying that, I really can't put my name to this because I do feel that the living conditions in plot 1 and 2 are just not sustainable. I can't see a family being able to enjoy that house and being overlooked. I think there is room for something, but not this particular application. Thank you.
Indeed. Chairman, do I understand it that the additional information provided is not going to be considered as part of this application?
Correct, because they're amendments and they would have to be a new application. You can't change the, it would create a whole new part of the report. So
yeah. In that sense, sorry.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
In that sense, Chairman, could I ask the committee to consider deferment, because that would be beneficial to all round. And maybe we might get some mileage on the second house, which is causing a bit of concern. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. They can consider that. We've got to speak to the first, vote to the first motion first, and depending on how that turns out, then we can move along. I'm just going to make a couple of points of observation, having listened to everybody, and been looking at this plan for the time that we've been speaking, which has been quite a length of time. And I think it is an important application because it really does ask us to question how we consider garden-style applications. That, it can be a bit harsh saying, backland type development, whatever. It has been developed around by Donsmead, and that creates some sort of environment. It is within the boundary, therefore there is a presumption in favour of development. But sitting here looking at it, I've thought a lot about it. And when I first saw it, as Councillor Ganley said, I thought, what on earth is this? Because actually, unfortunately, the plan in the pack didn't show Donsmead, but we have seen that and we have been able to consider it in that context. Several things come to my mind that have been mentioned, reiterate. The garden of number 1 and really 2 are very, very small. 3-bedroom houses with a tiny pocket handkerchief. I don't think you could count the garden around the side where the car parks is. I mean, who sits and has a nice sort of after cup of tea in the afternoon with their garden table next to their parked car? Not many people do that. That would be, that's unfortunate, isn't it? The car parking spaces actually look like they have a footprint the size of the house. And so mostly we talk about not enough parking here. I think that they've made an error in putting too much parking at the loss of garden space. I'm not sure if that would have changed my opinion, but it doesn't help. And if the applicant is looking to come back, maybe that's something they might consider. Sadly, we can't change that as a committee. We can't say we'll approve this with less car parking. We have to decide on what we've got in front of us. But I think more importantly, I look at it and I think, is it a good transition from now, what is Donsmead Drive and the row of houses, Fairlight, Terracotta, etc., into Timber Lodge and Eva Lodge? And it's not. It's something which has been inserted a lot of development into a relatively small area. I don't have a fundamental objection to development of this site, but I think it is far too intense. And I think the living area in number 1 and 2, the garden area, is just too small. And I think the transition is wrong. It's a pity in a way that when Donsmead was done, and maybe what's happening with Timber Lodge, I don't know, something's happening there, this could not have been included, because I think it could have been incorporated really well into, and I hate the word comprehensive development, but a more comprehensive development that would work for all concerned. So I think the applicant should be able to go away with the thought that there is an opportunity here, but perhaps it might not be this opportunity. We'll see when we take the vote. I'm very sensitive to personal circumstances, but and there are provisions within our policies for some personal circumstances. I mean, there is personal permission given for certain things, but this doesn't relate to that. And we have to be very careful that we are a policy-based decision-making committee. And, we do hear lots of stories of what this will present. When I look at this, I sort of get the impression that actually they want to build the houses for the children and fund that with the other houses. That's how I view it. That's not a policy-based decision or thought process, but that's what I can see here. And I'm sensitive to that, but it just does not transition in my mind at all. So they're my thoughts, and they're the thoughts that I think I've heard come out today when people have been speaking. I'm not entirely convinced of the overlooking, because there is a lot of trees and so forth there. I am concerned that the root protection zones actually go over two of the car parking areas. I don't know how you can develop a car parking space without grading off the ground and therefore affecting the roots of those trees. The roots of trees are at the top of the ground, quite sensitive ones. So those root protections would not work in those areas, factually. On that basis, they're all the things I've got to say, to include my own comments and summarise those of yours as well. I think there seems to be a feeling that development could happen on this site, but potentially this is not the design. So let's see how we all think about that. Councillor Prochak has moved for refusal and seconded by Councillor Thomas. Could we have a show of hands to support the motion, which is refusal? So if you put your hand up, you're supporting refusal. Get that counted? And those against? Yeah, one. And those abstaining. I think we've captured everyone there. So that application is refused. And we'll move on to the next application, which is RR 2021 748P, South Court Avenue. And this has come to the committee because it is an applicant who's related to a member of staff. Who's doing this one? Good.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought I'd give myself the hopefully less controversial one. These don't usually cross your desk. It's a householder application, but as explained, the applicant is related to a member of planning staff. So this is a proposal for extensions and alterations to the main house. The extension is a two-storey rear extension, and the other alterations include things like re-rendering the property, which is currently brick-facing. They're also proposing wider vehicular access and replacing the front boundary wall. The property completed in a row of detached houses. This is that detail, just showing wider access. That's the section of wall there to be replaced. The red bit is where the location of the extension is, which will square off the building. These are the proposed plans. In particular, be interested in the rear bit. You'll see there, that's the bit that's being added. And just a couple of photos for you. So that's existing. That'll be slightly wider at the front there. Will be replaced. It's slightly taller. There's a condition number 4, which requires further detail because they've only provided a typical section of the wall, and we just want to make sure that it's not too tall along the whole thing. So we've asked for a full elevation of the whole street, so the whole frontage of the plot. And then that's a photo from the rear where you can see they've been remodelling the garden. I think they've taken down what may have been a previous extension on there as well, but that return bit there is where the two-storey element is going to be. So recommendation for approval.
Move recommendation.
We have a mover of the recommendation, and we have lots of seconds, so thank you very much. I think we'll go for Councillor Barnes to hand up first. Does anyone want to have any discussion on this application? So if I could call from both those who support the recommendation of approval. Thank you very much. I've been asked for a 5-minute break. So we'll have a 5-minute break, returning at 5 to 11. We can. Thank you very much. We're going to start the live stream again. Thank you very much. This is the continuation of the Planning Committee meeting of the 15th of July. Thank you very much. And we are moving on to item 9, which is undetermined planning applications. And I don't know if you would like to say anything about those, or if anyone would like to ask any questions about any of these undetermined applications. Do we have any questions?
Can't resist drawing your attention to the paddock at Northing.
What would you like to draw our attention to? You are being naughty. You are being naughty. Are there any? Yes, Councillor Galley.
Recently, I saw an email from an officer saying that currently planning applications were taking between 100 and 150 days to resolve. Is that still the case? Because I have a resident in Ewhurst Green who has been going through the planning process for 18 months. And there's still apparently no end in sight. At least I've seen no indication that there's an end in sight to their travails. You like that word, travails?
Do you want to comment on that? Yeah, I think Sam will give an update on where you're up to with that.
So timescale wise, that is the same range, 100 to 150 days, but it is an average. If you'd like to approach me about that particular application, in which case I will obviously, is that the one you mentioned to me earlier? Fair enough. But just to clarify, is that the one that you mentioned to me earlier? The separate one. Okay, fine. Well, we can look into those, but it does mean, yeah, because it's an average, that there are some that are taking quite a lot longer. I mean, by way of an example, we've brought to your attention previously that there were a good chunk of cases that were allocated to a previous consultant, Eve Watt, who left us at Christmas, and the decision was made to reallocate his new work to the new officer when they started, which you'd appreciate has now taken all of 6 or 7 months. So those applications in particular, which are about 25 odd of them, they're significantly extended. But yeah, on average, it's still 100 to 150 days.
It would be helpful, I think. Sorry, Kathy, you, Councillor Hunt.
Looking at Clavering Walk, obviously they're waiting for submissions. Have we got any kind of clue of an idea when that might come back in?
So I understand that there was some additional drainage information, and actually this is maybe a little out of date, this update. I believe that it's with the Drainage Authority to provide feedback on, with the hope that the application was going to come forward to the Planning Committee again over the summer. But I can't provide that certainty at this point in time. So I don't think it's pie in the sky. I think we're just waiting that feedback, but I can't say for certain because it's just not resolved yet.
Yes, Councillor Barnes. Then I will do John this time first.
We're being a little unfair to ourselves. It seems to me by listing 11 Elsie Lane twice. In some senses, RR 2020 has surely overtaken the earlier one, and they should at least be grouped in a report, even if we have to report it.
Well, we can certainly look into the way that they're listed. I presume it's just by date order. But yeah, I mean, it's very likely that the 2017 application won't probably be on future agendas, but the owner of the site is keeping their options open, so it still exists for the time being.
Councillor Mary Barnes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm very concerned that the Sinchurst, the land at Pashley Road, Ticehurst, is taking so long to come to some sort of conclusion. It really has been going on now for about the last year. And I know the parish council particularly is very unhappy about the fact that we have not yet made a decision. In fact, I think a decision is actually being recommended by, or rather recommendations being made. But, and now I see amended plans currently being advertised. And now I'm quite confused because I saw that being advertised some months ago. I just wondered if there's any idea at all of when this is likely to come to some sort of resolution.
Yeah, you're right. The amendments were probably a little longer ago. So the advertisement for that's probably expired now. They were under consideration, but I understand that the planning officer and the design officer involved with that probably come to an agreement with the applicant on those amendments. So there's an outstanding issue, I believe, which has been raised with you previously, Councillor Barnes, around affordable housing, or you've at least had a discussion about it with the case officer previously. And a query has been raised by the case officer, who unfortunately has been off recently, but returned to work yesterday, around the affordable housing, and that query is with me and the affordable housing officer to come to a conclusion about. So once we've settled that, hopefully it will be something that we can move forward with.
Would be really grateful to be kept in the loop on this, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll make a point on Churchill Farm in Settlescombe. This is actually one of the sites from the neighbourhood plan, as is Gate Cottage, which is mentioned in there too. They're right next door to each other. They're negotiating a common entrance. I sat in on a very positive meeting with the owner and their agent and Sarah Shepherd last week. And so this is, although what I'd like to sort of raise is that this is also a site being promoted as a self-build site. And of course, that has implications on SIL, but there is some need for either our policymakers or DM to, I think, clarify the issues for our position on self-build, stroke SIL, stroke affordable housing. I know that we have a position, but in that meeting it came forward that that our position was different to what was being what had happened in other parts of the country, where this is one of the first sites that's come up that's really like this. You know, it's sort of 10 self-built houses. So it would be good to bottom that out. I think Sarah has the information, so it would just be good that we had clarity. I think it was provision of affordable houses on self-built sites.
Yeah, I think I can comment a little bit about that now. I mean, if I've got the wrong idea, then I'll certainly take it away and we can think about coming back to you. But my understanding of the issue was that, it's been put forward that that scheme is pretty much exclusively self-built, from what I understood, and that somehow justified it in terms of the reduction or non-provision of affordable housing.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think the point that has been made to the applicant is that, in terms of our approach to self-build, there is a policy that relates to that, and we only seek self-build units on larger development schemes. I think it's 50 or more, and then it's a percentage of those schemes are then meant to be self-build. Actually, recently come across it with the Paddock scheme in Northiam that included self-build as a policy requirement. Because the policy doesn't apply in this instance, the applicant is just putting it forward as self-build off their own back, and as a way of them achieving development on that site that they think is more marketable or more give them more opportunity, whatever the case might be. However, that's not a planning consideration. I mean, we do give material weight to proposals that are for self-build, but when it comes to it, if it's not a policy requirement as per our current policy, then the site should be built as per any other policies that apply. So in that particular instance, because we don't require the self-build to be achieved, they should otherwise then just achieve a development that complies with the other policies, and so they have to provide the affordable housing. And so that's what they've been advised, and I think that's what the issue is about.
It's useful to know.
So that would be our approach with anybody else that comes forward wanting to build self-build instead of affordable housing, or self-build on smaller plots. Fine, build the self-build. All 10 of those units could be self-build if they wanted to, but a couple of them would still need to be affordable housing. Affordable housing as self-build I've never come across before, but they'd still need to, they wouldn't be not allowed to provide it unless they can demonstrate a viability argument.
Oh, thank you. That's 10.
So I meant that as a throwaway comment. It depends on the size of the development on a particular site. It was just a general comment about.
Well, 10 would generate 4, but I think in a site of 10 or less, they can do it by muted sum, can't they? There's all that sort of stuff that goes on too. it gets changed constantly. Councillor Thomas.
This is on a different issue. It's going back to the issue raised by Councillor Harmer in relation to Gathering Walk. It's a very confusing situation there, isn't it? Tremendously so. The officers decided against the development of Gathering Walk. Then the inspectorate rejected the authority's position. But what is now being put forward by the applicant is so different, isn't it, from the original submission in terms of drainage, including the idea that water will be pumped uphill by a mechanical pump. It's a very, very different submission. So does that mean that the planning inspectorate's judgment is now set aside because it quite clearly, the planning inspectorate, when it backed the drainage, was wrong because the applicant themselves no longer think it's right? And if we're going to have a new assessment, which you're saying we do need to have, does that mean it can now come back to the planning committee?
Well, the application will be coming back to the planning committee anyway when the recommendation is ready for that. And no, it doesn't mean that the inspectorate's decision is put aside. It just means that at the time they decided it on the information they had to hand, they thought that it passed the appropriate assessment and also that they were happy to give it planning permission. But it was an outline. Inevitably, reserve matters, especially when everything is left to the reserve matters, those applications can look substantially different. But that application will also be subject to appropriate assessment. We have to carry out that at every single stage of approval. And so I suppose it's not starting from scratch, but it will be reconsidered about whether or not it passes that in terms of the habitat regulations. And otherwise, it's then a planning judgment based on the layout and the design, landscaping, as you would expect it to be otherwise. So, yeah, it's just no getting around the fact that it's a different proposal than how it was intended or how it was suggested it might look originally, but that's sometimes what happens with reserve matters. But it doesn't mean that anything won't be kind of considered properly. It all still goes through the process, and we'll see what happens.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on those? Otherwise, are we happy to? Do we have to take a vote on those? I think we do, don't we? Let's note the report is noted. And therefore, we will move on to the planning statistics, which I suspect Tim is going to do.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Planning Committee. So this report is the performance of development management for the fourth quarter of 2020-2021. And the report's in two sections. So the first section of the report is that period of quarter four, which is from the 1st of January to the 31st of March this year, which, as we all know, was at the height of the second wave of the pandemic. The second section compares this data with 7 previous quarters, so it gives you that kind of general direction of travel in terms of performance and workload. Just taking you through some of the figures. The 3 major criteria that we report to MHCLG, which is your majors, minors and others. So in this last quarter, in quarter four, is 70% for majors, 69 for minors and 63 for others. Majors being residential development over 10 units or 1,000 square meters of floor space. Minors are schemes of up to 10 units, and others are generally what it says, others, including domestic extensions and domestic kind of paraphernalia type applications. So if you look at tables 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3, the second part of the report, that gives you a comparison with the, as I said, the 7 previous quarters to give you, as I said, a direction of travel. And I don't know if anyone wants to make any comments on those figures. If not, I'll move on.
On the strong, Councillor Barnes.
Just a little troubled by the way we're falling back on minor applications. We seem to be holding our own on major ones. And the other thing I would just ask a factual question. Do I take it we have now brought in some outside assistance? Because we haven't been told that officially anywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, the overall report gives you the story of workload and performance. So as we go through the report, it may explain why our performance in determining application is starting to wane, if you like. We have brought in additional resources as a council. The council's invested in bringing Capita into development management, so they're on board, have been for the last 2 or 3 weeks, in terms of allocating existing cases that Sam referred to. The one particular previous officer left the organisation, and largely a lot of the new applications that are coming in at this moment in time. We also have extended that into the validation team. So one of the issues that's been a growing problem is capacity in the planning business support team in terms of validating applications. So we're now using in part Capita to support that team in validating applications, increasing that capacity. We're at a very early stage, it has to be said. So hopefully the benefits will come forward, but it will take possibly 1 or 2 weeks at the very earliest to get any kind of benefit from that, if you like. And moving forward, it may take a number of weeks. I don't know if Sam wants to send it to this, or we can talk about this after, because I believe we want to talk about that. But if there's nothing else on those particular figures, I'll take us forward through the rest of the report. So other areas to draw your attention to are the number of live applications. So if you look at table 6.1, that gives you the running total of the number of live applications we have, which is currently 771.
So that's 2 months worth, isn't it?
Yeah.
2 quarters worth, sorry.
Yeah, and you will see from that figure that's substantially more than the previous quarter and quarters before that. So just in terms of workload, it is really sky high, and that's one of the reasons why we're getting Capita in to help us out. So moving on to the number of applications. Oh, sorry.
Just a quick question. The increased number come in. I've read in the newspapers that a lot of people aren't going away on holiday and they're doing a lot of home improvements. So has that got anything to do with the increase in numbers of applications?
There is an element of that, yes. And also the other forms of applications we get in, and general PD inquiries and enforcement. There's an effect of enforcement impact as well, so which I'll come on into the report. Sam, are you going to? No. And then the number of applications received during that quarter are in a combination of table 1 on the first set of tables and table 5.1. So the running total for the last quarter in total is 332 plus 182 applications, which is 514. And again, you will see there's an upward number of applications we are having hand receiving from quarter to quarter. At the same time, number of applications determined, the last quarter is 227 plus 107, which is 334. And that's a combination of tables 2.0 and 5.2 to give you that comparison with previous 7 quarters. Moving to appeals lodged are table 7.1.
Sorry, my apologies.
Sorry.
Sort of just slightly out of my peripheral.
Can I ask you a question about these complaints? Because one of the things I seem to remember hearing at a previous meeting was that you sort of triage complaints according to their gravity. And I'm wondering whether, when you talk about the number of complaints resolved, do you mean complaints resolved to the satisfaction of the complainant, or do you mean complaints that might be resolved in the sense that you've made the decision that this complaint is not sufficiently serious to be prioritized? I'm wondering if, when you're under tremendous pressure, there's not a pressure to say, look, this is not serious enough for us to do. So I'm just asking a question about the meaning of those statistics.
The answer is all of the above, all of what you just said. It's a combination of all of those elements, and that's set out in table 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3. That's all the enforcement statistics. But you're right, there's a whole sifting process when complaints are received. We as a team, we sit down every week with new complaints, look at those to see whether they are indeed planning complaints in the first place. It's set out on our website, whether they are technical breaches of planning control and they're not expedient to take forward. So, for example, the classic case, a fence which is 2.1 metres high in a rear garden when the permitted development height is 2.0 metres, it's not expedient to take that complaint any further. So you make those, so it is a triage process. And then it goes through to the process. What do you do? If it is it a complaint which is material? So what do you do? Is it likely to get some form of consent? Which do you invite an application to resolve the issue? If it's not, you obviously ask the individual to either remove the structure or stop the use. And if they don't do that, then you potentially look at formal action. So the 28 complaints that have been resolved are a mixture of all of those elements.
Yes, I like that's a lens.
Can I just ask a question about that? Because obviously the number of complaints on hand, 481, is slightly scary. But when it involves legal, do you feel that there is an issue with legal moving fast enough to resolve these? And is there? I would be really interested to know if there's an issue there in terms of working with the legal department to actually push these things through.
I mean, the planning function isn't the only function in the council which is under stress, and legal services are also under a amount of stress as well. And they only have a certain amount of resource that they dedicate to the planning function. And they are also having difficulties in recruiting and backfilling staff. So they also have that issue. But to answer your question of where there is issues, yes, in terms of their capacity. And when we're dealing with far more complaints, when we're sending those referrals up to legal, then there's going to be a logjam at some point. So we have to almost prioritise those cases which we're seeking legal advice over.
Just briefly, it may be of interest to the committee to hear of a complaint or enforcement issue in US Green, which is, I am told, is the biggest that the council has ever dealt with. And it has had to be broken down into, I can't remember whether it's 20 or 40 separate files, separate issues. It's huge. How have they got away with developing woodland for so long and building stuff in that woodland for so long? It is enormous. Without so much, so big that 2 officers been allocated to deal with it. Huge.
Summary of that.
I can't give a detailed summary because there's a couple of sites that are around the similar issue, but it's because the lands have been broken up into lots of subplots. There's lots of individual owners, and then lots of different people are doing different things with their individual plots, and so we have to make a number of individual cases because we have to pursue them in slightly different ways. And so yeah, there is this one, and there are other areas around the district where similar things like that have happened. In fact, Councillor Projak has experienced something similar in her district. So it's not something we're unfamiliar with. Fortunately, it's not a huge problem, but when it does arise, then yeah, we have multiple cases relating to one single piece of land, but multiple owners. So there's lots of separate cases.
Any view?
Yeah, there's just one last thing about land charges. Land charges received in table 9.1 and completed 9.2 remains very, very high. Bearing in mind this is the first quarter or the last quarter of 2020, 2021, when stamp duty was still exempt. I suspect that figure will drop quite significantly by Q2 of this year because that stamp duty now been reinstated from the 30th of June. That's all I've got to say, Chairman.
All right, yeah, and I think it's worth saying.
If you don't mind, can I take the opportunity to give a bit of feedback about how you can potentially help us, if that helps you, especially if you're getting so many queries? Because we have been tried to be quite consistent with our messaging. So all officers have got standard out of office auto replies on their email and on their voicemails. We've also re-clarified with customer services recently about what they should be telling customers when they're phoning as well. And it's just dawned on me now we're speaking about it. You probably don't know that we've been doing that. So if you have that information too, it might help you when you're dealing with these, dealing with your residents and who are customers because they've got planning applications in. So the simple message when it comes to most applications, and that includes those minors and those others because that's the big chunk of our work, yet they are taking between 100 and 150 days. And so the messages that are going out, and I'm not saying this is good customer service, but it's acknowledging the position we're in.
if we'd actually simply confined ourselves to resisting the change to the windows or looking at the change to the windows, rather than the internal arrangements of a late 20th century building, we wouldn't be in this situation of facing an appeal. It troubles me, frankly. I'm not even sure if they weren't in the curtilage of the Oast, whether we would be bothered at all about this. And the internal changes can't conceivably affect the Oast. Do you want to comment on that? Or?
I mean, if you want us to have that, sorry, if you want to have a discussion about that any further, then please do let me know. But Willard's Hill Farm, did you mention?
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's an application for a certificate of lawfulness, so it's not a matter of negotiation. It's just, is that development lawful or not? So I assume this is non-determination on the basis that we haven't dealt with it in time and they got frustrated about that rather than that we were putting any barriers in the way because there was nothing to negotiate. It's either okay or it's not.
It's a planning application of, it's not a planning application.
Yeah.
They're not putting up an application. It's, this is what we've got and we want it to be made lawful.
Yeah, so I don't know the details, but because it's a lawful and specific application, I would assume that it's been appealed just because they haven't had their decision in time. Yeah.
You just have to say how you're prioritising.
I think we've provided some feedback on non-determination in recent times just because the fact that so many applications are over their determination period, it gives the opportunity for applicants to do that. We try our level best to get extensions of time, and as you'll see from the statistics, we do quite a good job of that, although it has dipped in Q1, but I think Q4, which is the one that's reported in here, which was January to March, that was the height of our issues, I would say. So I would hope that the reporting you get from now on Q1, maybe not so much, but definitely Q2 onwards, you'll see some improvements in that respect. But yeah, we are in this period of time where, because we have so many applications on hand that are over their determination period, where those applicants haven't agreed an extension of time, which again is still only a handful of the ones that are over, so just, the pool of them starts getting a bit smaller. Unfortunately, we are seeing a bit more resistance from those applicants and agents in agreeing those extensions because they don't see any good reason why they should, if, I was putting it frankly, because we don't get a lot of information from them otherwise. I mean, anecdotally, you would have read things in the news about this kind of stuff, people just getting a bit fed up with the kind of level of service they're receiving from all different kinds of organisations and businesses where COVID-related issues might be an excuse. And I think that this is a sign of us seeing that happen to us as well. But it is still a small proportion. You're right to be concerned. We are too, but we do try our level best to get the extensions to avoid this and try to explain, like I said, we've got this 150-day mark at the moment. But when they've gone over that, the applicants are getting an explanation about why that particular case has taken that long and then what they can expect going forward. But Councillor Bryant already touched on that aspect of that work sometimes being a bit difficult as well because caseloads are so high. I think this is a moment in time. This will probably, what I'm hoping will be the worst report that you get in that respect with the number of applications that are non-determination on here. I just can't guarantee you that. But we've done what we can to try and do something to turn the tide, and we'll just have to see if that works going forward.
Can I take it, thanks for the explanation. Can I take it an appeal started as one by representations? Because presumably if there were a hearing, we'd have known about it.
No, an appeal started as any type of appeal, so it could be a public inquiry, a hearing, or a representation appeal. Just to explain the report then, for those of you that haven't really ever queried that before, but have not necessarily appreciated the finer detail. When somebody makes an appeal and they submitted it to the planning inspectorate, it hasn't started. All they've done is just submit the appeal forms to the inspectorate. That's what's listed under appeals lodged. Appeals started is when we've actually got a letter from the planning inspectorate saying that appeal that was lodged is valid and we have now started the appeal. So in terms of a written representation, it starts to clock on us having to submit an appeal statement. But in terms of a hearing, it starts the whole process of a date for that hearing being set at some point in the future, residents being notified about that hearing or that inquiry, whatever the case may be. But the started date is for any type of appeal. It's when PIN's notified that they've started it and that they are now looking into it.
And as you can see, when there's a problem, everything takes longer, including this meeting. We'll move on. If we could note that report, and we have a late edition, which is the housing delivery test, which I think who's got that, Tim?
It's me, Chairman. Thank you. Okay, so the housing delivery test published in January of each year is a monitoring tool to demonstrate whether local planning authorities are building enough homes to meet their housing need. This compares the number of new homes delivered over the previous 3 years set against the authority's housing requirement in that same period. The housing delivery test result determines what the local planning authority will need to do in future years. At Rother, the build requirement for the 3 years up to January 2021 is 1,035 dwellings, calculated to be a mix of the existing plan requirements, that being the core strategy and the DASA, up until they became 5 years old and therefore out of date, and more recently using a new local housing needs figure applying the standard methodology. But taking into account the disruption caused by the pandemic and subsequent national lockdowns. The result is that Rother delivered in a 3-year period 65% of the build requirement. Because the delivery is below 75% of the housing delivery test requirement, Rother is required to do the following. Firstly, apply 20% buffer to the housing supply of deliverable sites for the purpose of assessing the council's 5-year land supply, which, as we know, is currently 2.87 years. This has already been applied from previous years. Secondly, the NPPF's presumption in favour of sustainable development will apply when considering planning applications. Again, we're already applying this. The housing delivery test result will be a material consideration within reports and planning applications going forward. And finally, the council is required to produce an action plan to identify the reasons for under-delivery of housing, explore ways to reduce the risk of further under-delivery, set out measures the authority intends to take to improve the levels of delivery. The action plan is set out in Appendix 1 for your information. The action plan will now be published on the Council's website on the 19th of July, i.e. within 6 months of the publication of the housing delivery test figure as required by government. The plan sets out a number of key actions going forward, including but not limited to the following. Giving priority to completing our new local plan, 2019 to 2039. Supporting the delivery of housing through the Council's local housing company, Lions Homes. Proactively investing in infrastructure, allowing for future housing growth. Setting up a landowners forum. And finally, granting of planning permissions on site allocations. Council recognises that delivering housing growth is complex, and part of the actions in the plan are to support landowners and house builders to deliver of housing. Success of the actions will be measured and reported in subsequent years through further action plans and also through the local plan monitoring report. This report is for noting. Happy to take questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor Butcher.
Yeah, the action plan, and Councillor Barnes will remember this from the Building Ask and Finish group. And a lot of the actions in our action plan are taken from the work of that very good Task and Finish group led by Councillor John Barnes. At the last scrutiny meeting, it was brought up that these working party, the results of very good working party work from the scrutiny were actually not fed back to scrutiny to find out, to monitor them basically. And I think certainly the housing issues Task and Finish group should be revisited, definitely. There were action points that we probably haven't got the resources to deliver because it would take, say, meetings with landowners and such like. But I think certainly when I went to a training session given by the Planning Advisory Group, and I asked this question, how can we do it? And that was one of the things, is working working with with developers, really, getting relationships with developers and actually working together with them. And as I say, that's got resource implications, but I think it's one of the things we're going to have to do. Thank you.
That's Barnes.
Yes, I can't access it at the moment, so I can't tell whether the gap is widening as it was between delivery and permissions given. But we are face to face with a problem, which is one of build-out. In other words, the problem is not with the planning system, it's with the housing market. I'm strongly supportive of, we seem finally to be moving on the landowners forum, which seems to be a crucial moment. There are a number of other things we might do. The two I missed, which I think possibly our housing people could look at, are working with community land trusts, in fact, encouraging the development of land trusts. And indeed, I will couple with that the notion that when we get our new local plan, I think exception sites should count to the credit of the settlement, because it seems to me to count those separately actually is a disincentive to parishes to cooperate. The other thing I would like to see us explore in some detail at some stage, and probably better at scrutiny than here, is whether we can find some way of working with small builders, a partnership effort, because many small builders, I think, would turn sites around very fast. And it seems to me that would help us again in progress towards the preliminary test. But the problem is the government is obsessed with the notion that the planning system is blamed for something that it isn't. And getting rid of this ghastly land supply test is about the only silver lining to the government's proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Langlands.
On that point, I think taking for an example what we've done today, the planning application today, is there no way that we can bring this pre-application support back in so that a site does, you are actually saying, yes, let's go ahead with this, rather than refusing it, suggesting, refusal. I think the right advice, and we would be delighted. I think we all agreed we would be delighted to have said yes to a building in that space. But I think it was just the fact that to go back again and do it again is such a shame. Am I right in thinking that pre-application support would be beneficial and we would bring these things forward a bit quicker?
Yes and no. With the example, no, because that application hasn't been affected by us closing the pre-application service. It just, that would just been what would have been negotiated as part of the planning application, which was only really the access, which was altered, not the scheme otherwise. But yeah, with regard to pre-application moving forward, although the avert message has been that pre-application has been closed, we have actually taken on board some pre-application inquiries, especially for housing schemes that are going to help us deliver. So those developers have contacted us and we've taken those on board where we can. We are reviewing from now on a monthly basis, reopening the service. And as you'd expect, it's all to do with capacity. So I suppose going back to the earlier conversation about the fact the tide is now hopefully beginning to turn, we will see ourselves in a position where, yeah, the service will open and everything will be back to normal. But to give you an indication of that, I don't really think that will be until September at the earliest. But Tim and I will review it at the end of this month and also again in August to see if things have changed such that we can start taking some of those on. It may well be that it opens for some types of inquiries. For example, the officers that are dealing with like small household related things, they're really getting through their work now. And it may be that they don't need the full 6 months in order to kind of have that respite, that actually within a couple of months' time they can start be allocated work again. And if that's the case, that means they can start we can start to allocate them pre-apps in relation to some of those things. But the more significant schemes, it's some and some. We have actually taken some on board even over the last 6 months. It's just that we're not routinely doing that, but we're going to review it monthly.
So I would add to that, because I've had this discussion with Sam before as well. I mean, the sooner we can get that back together, the better. There's no question about it, and do it well, because people expect to get a service when they're paying, and that was a criticism which was lodged during some of the interviews for the planning review. And so, you know, they pay the money, they want to get the service. What they were doing, they were paying the money, they weren't getting the service. And so the attitude was, we might as well just put the application in, because we'll just chance it on that. And you can understand that. But there is also the situation which Sam has commented on to me before, in that a lot of people come for pre-application advice and just ignore it. I mean, if you read the pre-application advice for the PGL application, you'd wonder why they ever put the application in. I mean, you read it, you thought, well, how could you reconcile those two documents? You know, you wouldn't have seen that, but I happened to have seen it. It was sent to me, and so you do get some issues like that as well. And perhaps who knows what would have happened with this scheme this morning? You know, applicants will go in the direction they want to go, and people don't like hearing things they don't want to hear, so they'll make their decisions. And also, they'll take a chance, won't they? Gets refused by an officer or by a committee, and they'll just take that to appeal. You know, it's a throw of the dice. Well, that's a point. That's a good point, actually. Sometimes it does. Yeah, sometimes it does. Yeah, sometimes it does. All right.
So just so that everyone's aware, yeah, if there had been pre-application discussions prior to that application coming in, our typical approach is to make the advice public with the planning application. So you can always look on the planning application documentation and see if it's on there. Often on the application form, the applicant will indicate whether they did it, and there would usually be like a reference number. But by the time a planning application comes in, we typically don't have an issue with making that information public. Prior to that, there are issues around confidentiality and commercial sensitivity. Thank you. So we wouldn't usually do it beforehand. But yeah, if it's not there and it has been submitted, you can always ask.
Okay. Well, that report is for noting, and you also need to note the item 12, the date for the next site inspection, which is the 10th of August. We do have to have a meeting in August for any applications coming forward. I know this is a bit of a bugbear with people, but that's just the way the planning system works. And I don't think Sam is going to be with us at that next meeting. And for those who, I think everyone knows, maybe some don't, Sam is actually moving to Wealdon, which is he was poached. He was poached, and it is a sad loss, I have to say. Sam works extraordinarily hard, has got fantastic technical skills, and I know for all our site visits, he's very thorough in what he presents to us, and in these meetings as well, and deals with rejection very well. When that occasionally happens, when there's a change in the decision that we might make versus the recommendation. So I want to personally, and on behalf of the committee, thank Sam for all the work that he's done, for his commitment. You've worked through probably one of the hardest periods of planning in Rotherham, and I hope that's not why you're leaving and going somewhere else. But we thank you for doing that. It's probably the toughest job that anyone's had for a period of time, and you've worked through it well and with poor resources. So thank you very much, Sam. Well, yeah. What date do you actually leave, Sam? Do you know? Do you have a date?
I do have a date yet, so I'm just not coming next month because I'm on holiday, God forbid. But I'm actually here until the 3rd of September. So you can send me all your queries up until then.
And so am I right to say that you don't have to fulfill a commitment to say that the results would be improving in the next quarter?
That's right, yeah.
But we hope that that does happen. So thank you very, very much. We'll all be in contact with you, I'm sure, and maybe we'll lock the door and not let you out. We'll see what happens. All right, so thank you very much.
Could I just add my thanks as well, because we do wish you well. We shall miss you a lot, an awful lot. And what I noted particularly was when we were on site visits pre-COVID, and we had a green planning committee, and somebody would ask a question, and you were very, very clear, articulated the answer, and everybody said they learnt a lot from you. So thank you for that, and thank you for, well, we wish you well.
Good. And so I'm going to end the meeting. There is just, if you could just bear with and stay on for 5 minutes more, I think Sam wants to just go through some stuff. So a meeting officially closed at 5 minutes to 12 or thereabouts. And if we could stop the live stream, thank you very much.